As we get closer and closer to having a profit-sharing model in college football, should we give the SEC and Big Ten the credit, and are they going to be the saviors of the sport? Let's talk about that right after this word from our sponsor. Ladies and gentlemen, this episode is brought to you by Dutch Miller Automotive, where friends and family pricing means you get the best deal right up front on any new or pre-loved vehicle in stock every time. With brands like Chevrolet, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram, Kia, Hyundai, Ford, GMC, Buick, and Subaru, the Dutch Miller Automotive family is always growing and ready to put you in the car or truck you've been searching for. Check out our inventory across West Virginia at DutchMillerAuto.com or come in today to the home of friends and family pricing, only at a Dutch Miller Automotive store near you. What is up? Welcome into another edition of Couz's Corner. My name is Couz. Come in, make yourself comfortable, belly yourself up to the bar, and let me pour you out this shot of top-shelf college football content. On tap today at Couz's Corner, we are serving up some information and analysis and my opinion on the new profit-sharing model that's being talked about around college sports. But I'm going to focus in this video, at least towards the end, I'm going to talk about the Big Ten and SEC's part in this, and if they are the ones who should get credit for bringing this idea to the table, because according to one writer, that's the case. Now, to give you the background, most of you probably know this, but for those who don't, I'll go ahead and go through a brief summary here. The reason this is a thing is because of the House versus NCAA case. The House case basically is where several student athletes from the past are suing the NCAA and the Power 4 schools, what used to be the Power 5, saying, hey, you owe us back pay for 4 years before NIL became legal or became a thing. And the only reason it's 4 years is because the statute of limitations only goes back that far. And oh, by the way, you also have to come up with a revenue sharing model for athletes going forward. That's also part of the case. It's a two-part deal here. And I didn't learn that until I started reading into some of these articles that are out there about this that were written earlier in the week, primarily by Pete Thamel over at ESPN. We've heard Ross Dellinger mention it, and he wrote another piece on it with more details. Dennis Dodd at CBS Sports chimed in, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. But this has been talked about by many people. There's been many articles about it, but there's two parts to it there. And we've heard also Mitt Winter, the sports law attorney, who chimes in on these topics on X. He has also put out some stuff on X about it. Just kind of cleared some things up for those of us, and he kind of takes things and puts them at makes them easier to understand for us non-legal minds out there who need things to be dumbed down. All right, so I'm going to use a tweet by Ross Dellinger to kind of give you the highlights, the bullet points of what this House case and the settlement that's being talked about, which I haven't really talked about yet. They're talking about a settlement in this case, which would lead to this revenue sharing model that's being talked about potentially. And the reason they want to settle the case is because it would save them a lot of money. The belief is if this thing goes to trial, the NCAA is going to lose, because let's face it, when does the NCAA ever win court cases? They don't. So the belief is if this thing goes to court, the NCAA and the Power 5 schools are screwed. And they could be on the hook for over $4 billion. Well, if they can settle, the price tag would be less, likely more like $1 billion for the back pay piece. And then there would be the future piece where they would be sharing revenue with student athletes. And what is being talked about is a $15 to $20 million permissive cap per school that these student athletes could get paid annually. So basically, they would be bringing NIL to the schools to a degree, and the TV revenue and all the revenue from ticket sales and all the revenue these athletic departments make, they would share 15 to 20 million of that with student athletes. Now, schools could opt in, or they could choose not to opt in. They could pay their student athletes less than 15 to 20 million a year, but the belief is it wouldn't go over 20 million. Now, if you're a Big 12 or ACC school, that might sound great to you because, hey, SEC can't pay their student athletes more. But let's face it, the toothpaste is already out of the tube there. They're making more money in other areas and able to spend in other areas. But at least here, they would not be able to outspend you, at least in most cases. Another piece to this, according to Ross Dellinger, if the settlement happens, it is believed that potentially the Power 5 schools and the NCAA would have 8 to 10 year reprieve, basically, for antitrust cases, more antitrust lawsuits. Now, Mitt Winter, the sports law attorney I mentioned, doesn't seem to agree with that. He thinks there could still be cases other student athletes in the future could still sue because they still would not be collectively bargaining this model. It still wouldn't be an employment model, which is another hot topic. This would just be a revenue sharing model. And Mitt Winter seems to believe that a lot of student athletes may not accept that and would file future lawsuits. But we'd see how the settlement goes. Also, according to Ross, they still need Congress to step in to give them that antitrust exemption so that they wouldn't get sued in the future. You still have NIL collectives lingering out there that student athletes may want to utilize for, further NIL opportunities to capitalize, especially the star players out there like the Shedeur Sanderses of the world, for an example. He may want to capitalize even more, and others just like him. The transfer rules would still be, a thing where student athletes can transfer as many times as they want with no penalty, as long as they meet the academic requirements. That's still a thing. Ross mentions that this would increase the gap between the G5 and the P5 or P4 because the G5 likely would not be able to opt into this plan, which means they would probably lose out on even more recruits. They likely wouldn't have the money to share their profits with their student athletes. You still have, also looming as part of this, you'd still have Title IX. How would Title IX come into play? They still have Title IX obligations to meet as a university, and there's a looming deadline. I mean, this thing is supposed to go to trial in January. They don't want that to happen. I've even heard in certain other podcasts out there, other shows, that the NCAA and the Power 5 conferences would like to get this done sometime by the end of May. Now, that's a pretty quick timeline, but they've already started the conversations. Now, in the articles written by ESPN, Ross Dellinger, and others, nowhere in there was the Big Ten and SEC mentioned as the ones leading the charge here. But when you look at Dennis Dodd's article, which I'm going to share with you, but here's what Dodd's article has to say. Now, this is not the whole article, okay? I'll leave a link to the entire article in the description, but what I wanted to focus on is the first couple paragraphs of it, and it starts out right here, the title of the article. SEC Big Ten developing plan to share revenue with players and potential landmark change to college athletics. The model being discussed by college sports top conferences could go a long way towards settling outstanding lawsuits. It says the SEC and Big Ten are at the center of developing a revenue-sharing plan with players that would redefine college athletics for the future, CBS Sports has learned. The still unrefined proposal, currently utilizing the name Modern Model, would not only share revenue with the players, but also perhaps help settle the House versus NCAA lawsuit that goes to trial in January 2025. The antitrust lawsuit is a class action complaint alleging the NCAA and power conferences have conspired to suppress athletes' compensation. The lawsuit continues to be the top hurdle for programs in planning college athletics' future. Settlement money alone could cost universities between $15 million and $20 million. Athletic directors have been frustrated trying to figure out how to rearrange their budgets or otherwise account for payment of that size. ESPN reported Monday night that the Power 4 conferences are in deep discussions regarding a revenue-sharing plan. It is not clear where that revenue would come from or how it would be distributed. Sources told CBS Sports the revenue-sharing idea emerged from ongoing talks between Power 4 administrators. In February, the SEC and Big Ten announced a joint advisory group to address the future of college athletics. Now, I'm going to skip part of it, but then it finishes by saying this. The SEC and Big Ten have increasingly taken over the sport as not just leading stakeholders, but leaders, period. This was further evidenced by their recent demand to receive a combined 58% of college football playoff media revenue rights beginning in 2026. The conference's teams have combined to obtain 29 of 40 CFP slots across the first 10 years of the playoff. Then the article stops. Like, the way that ends, I want to keep reading. Expand on that a little bit and what that has to do with revenue sharing, because you know what I think? Very little. The way Dennis starts his article off by saying SEC Big Ten developing plan to share revenue with players. No, Dennis. It's not just the SEC and Big Ten that are developing the plan. It's all the power conferences. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty confident all the FBS commissioners are involved in these discussions. So why do you have to specify the SEC and Big Ten like they're the heroes here? Like they're including everybody. They're trying to be fair and cap this at $20 million. Is this just a PR move by the SEC and Big Ten? Because, a lot of us on the outside of those two leagues, we look at them as the bad guys, especially the SEC and Greg Sankey, because he's always espousing, we want what's best for the college sports. But then you go out and you continue to take and you take and you take. What are you giving back to everybody else? Now, I understand Sankey's job is to take care of the SEC, and I don't fault him for that. So some of my bitterness or, negativity toward Greg Sankey may strictly be jealousy. Maybe it's coming from a place of jealousy. I don't know. But my problem is he comes out and says these things, that he wants what's best, and then he doesn't do that. Just don't say that, Greg. Just say, look, I'm doing what's best for my league, period. And end the conversation with that. Don't be a hypocrite. But anyway, I digress. How is the SEC and Big Ten? Dennis is making it out to sound like this is their plan. Now, he's probably just reporting what his sources are telling him. But it sounds to me like Dennis Dodd is doing nothing more here than being a mouthpiece for a PR campaign that the SEC and Big Ten are trying to wage here, because they want to look like the good guys and like they're doing this for the betterment of the sport, when in reality, they've done the opposite. In an article written, I don't know, a week or so ago, Ross Dellinger pointed out, he did an article about the heated discussions related to the college football playoff expansion and how those were very heated back in 21 and 22, back when Bob Bowlesby was still the commissioner of the Big 12. It got so heated in one meeting, he packed his stuff up and left the meeting. And a lot of it stemmed from this alliance that was formed between the Big 10, the Pac-12, and the ACC, which basically stopped college football playoff expansion negotiations in its tracks and cost all these schools and conferences a lot of money. Greg Sankey, that didn't sit well with Greg Sankey. So what did he do? He and the Big Ten, after Tony Petitti came in, decided to take their ball and threaten to go home. And in the article, here's what it says. Would the SEC have really taken its proverbial ball and left the college football playoff? Absolutely, SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey told Yahoo Sports. When we ended that set of meetings in January 22 without a decision, I was clear. If you are going to walk away from this opportunity, we are going to reevaluate our position on format, revenue sharing, and governance. People called me after the latest deal and said, why did you take the hard line? Why did you put us in this position? I said, you guys walked away from the deal, end quote. Now, so, and we all know, those two leagues are getting a much larger share of the college football playoff revenue than everybody else. Are they not? They're getting 58% of it. And they're doing that because they're mad over the way the negotiations went and because the alliance was formed back in 21 or 22. Guess who wasn't in the alliance? Greg Sankey. The Big 12. Bob Bowlesby was basically on your side in this argument. But what you just did by pouting and threatening to leave and taking your ball and going home hurt the Big 12 too. A conference that was on your side. Even after you took their two biggest brands, which I don't blame you for, by the way. But you're hurting people other than just the quote-unquote alliance conferences. You're hurting more than just the ACC. I would say the Pac, but they're gone. So it's basically you have a vendetta against the ACC, it appears, for forming the alliance and voting against expansion, but you're hurting everybody else in the process. And it even said in that article, had that not happened, had that alliance not formed, and those three leagues not been against college football playoff expansion, this latest college football playoff agreement would have looked completely different. And it likely would have been more equitable and more fair. And I have an issue with hurting conferences like the Big 12 and others who were on board with the expansion just because you're mad at one certain league or maybe a couple. That just seems to me like not the right way to handle things. So then, in order to save face, because of the greed you're showing, basically, the greed that it appears you're portraying here or that you have here, you want to put on a PR campaign and use Dennis Dodd as your mouthpiece and act like you're trying to save college football. It's bullcrap. The SEC and Big Ten are not saving jack squat. They're actually killing it. They're doing what they're paid to do by their presidents. I get it. I'm not saying they're doing the wrong thing. And the NCAA is just as much to blame as anybody for what's happening. But don't act like you're saving it, because it's not just you. The Big 12's in these discussions. The ACC is currently in these discussions, and heck, even other conferences. So to start that headline or that article with the Big Ten and SEC at the center of no, they're not. Charlie Baker with the NCAA came out with a revenue sharing idea back in December. This Big Ten and SEC leadership group or whatever it's called wasn't formed until February. People like me and others have been talking about revenue sharing for months. Heck, I've even heard Neil Brown say he wished revenue sharing was a thing years ago. I heard him say that 2 years ago. So don't act like it's just now a fresh idea that the Big Ten and SEC have come up with, because it's not the case. Let me know in the comments if you agree with me. Do you think this is a PR campaign by using Dennis Dodd as a mouthpiece? Or do the Big Ten and SEC deserve credit for this potential revenue sharing model that may, quote unquote, change the future of the sport? And that they're trying to make it like it's equitable and fair when nothing has been equitable and fair up to this point. I want to hear your thoughts. I also want to give a shout out to my VIP members of this episode. You can join this club by hitting the join button below or hitting the join button on my channel homepage. The member shout outs of this episode are Terry Alford, Timothy Green, Dane the Surveyor, and Mouth of the Mountains. Thank you all for being VIP channel members. If you want access to VIP only content, be sure to join today. It's either $2.99 a month or $4.99 a month. Very affordable. You're not locked in long term. You can cancel at any time, but the money will come directly out of your account. So it's easy peasy, no hard work for you. Also, check out the ONIT Athlete link in the description box if you want to get yourself some ONIT Athlete trading cards. I'll make a small commission if you use that link, and your favorite student athletes will get profits as well as part of NIL. You can also check out this video right here that talks more about conference realignment and the Big 12. Thanks for tuning into this episode. Have a top shelf day. Q Country Roads.